when despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I want to tell you a bedtime story. Well, it's a nap time story. Tricia Hersey was bone tired. See, it was 2013, and she had just begun the Master of Divinity program at Emory. The pace was rigorous. In lecture halls, Hersey felt unseen and unheard amongst her mostly white peers. The TV news at the time was an seemingly inescapable loop of police brutality against black people. Well, this only intensified her stress. 2 of her close relatives passed away unexpectedly. And one day, a thief snatched Hersey's backpack containing all of her class notes, her research, and her first sermon, which she was scheduled to preach in 2 days. Overwhelmed, Hersey wanted to quit school. But instead, she started napping. She napped in the campus quad. She napped in the library. She napped in the upholstered balcony pews of Cannon Chapel, pews that we know well from our recent Moravian love feasts. It was transformative, she says, and it enabled her to keep going. Hersey said, "I was healing. Naps saved my life." These days, Hersey is a napping evangelist. She talks about naps the way some people might describe a spiritual experience, because for her, that's what they are. Sleep is such a vulnerable place, and I believe that when you rest, you create a healing portal, she says. You find space to talk and vent, to hope, to dream. You can work things out you can't work out when you're awake. This epiphany inspired her to research the idea of rest as both a healing mechanism for cultural trauma and a form of resistance against oppression. Hersey dug into Emory Library's African American History archives, researching the lives and legacies of enslaved Africans who labored on Southern land, including her own ancestors. She studied this history through the lens of Black liberation theology. She says it was this whole examination of labor in the South and how bodies are commodified and how capitalism and white supremacy help that. Hersey talked to African Americans who had lived through the Jim Crow era about how their decades-old trauma manifested physically in their bodies. After exploring scientific research on how the brain uses sleep to process trauma, she became transfixed by the idea of rest as a form of reparations and sleep deprivation as an issue of racial and social justice. Rest was no longer personal, it was political. In 2016, Hersey founded the Nap Ministry. Maybe you've heard of it. Initially, she founded as kind of a performance art experiment. She hosted its first collective napping event, in which 40 people attended the following May. And since 2016, Hersey has led over a dozen public napping events in both Atlanta and her hometown of Chicago. Those attending the group naps are provided with yoga mats, pillows, blankets, and music. Hersey displays a sleep altar with candles, an anthology of first-person testimonies from enslaved people, and cotton from southern farms. I always like to ground the room in the space of our people before us who were never able to rest, she says. As the nap bishop, Hersey opens each event with meditation. After an hour of napping, she leads the group in a nap talk, similar to a Dharma talk, wherein attendees can share any discoveries that were unearthed during their rest. Typically, at least one person sheds tears. I really feel like we're deprogramming people, she says. We're pushing back against these systems, telling us we should feel guilty for laying down and taking a nap. In this pandemic, some of us, perhaps in the healthcare, education, or communications fields, find ourselves working harder than ever, but now from home without the built-in boundaries of the commute and office hours. Some of you without appointments or social and family obligations, suddenly you may find yourself with time unfolding before you like an open sea, and you find yourself unmoored. Either way, this is a challenging time to be productive. What an understatement. This is impossible. This is unreal. The reality of what is going on is difficult to fully comprehend, even as there are things to celebrate about it, such as the speed of our lives, maybe our relentless commute, or our rampant consumption suddenly grinding to a halt. We can delight in the realization that we didn't need as much as we thought we did to thrive. I remember day one of the physical distancing imperative. It was cute. I thought, I'll read a novel. Maybe I'll write a poem each day. I looked out at my yard and I thought, yes, this year, finally, a garden. Some of you all out there are romantically baking homemade bread every day and putting it out there on the internet. I see you. There's a whole world of sourdough starter enthusiasts that are crawling out of niche caves and entering the bright light of day, flaunting your fermented resilience for all to see. For many of you, the pace of this pandemic has been unrelenting. Work is home, home is stifling, and now we are never clocked out. In my house, anyway, every single hour is now heavily negotiated between my spouse, our 2 jobs, and parenting 2 people whose self-preservation instinct has yet to kick in. We won't discuss the homeschooling attempts and all the accompanying shame therein. Earlier this week, I had negotiated with my spouse, James, for 5 hours in a row to research and write this sermon. And I cannot express how complicated and necessary it was to create 5 straight hours for this. And when the moment arrived and I handed off the kids, I was supposed to get right to work. Here's what I did instead. I took an extra long walk and talked with my sisters on the phone. I sat in the yard and stared into space for an undetermined amount of time. I took the longest shower in recent memory. I applied and removed nail polish. I cleaned up my room. I fell asleep and awoke in a panic at all the wasted time. I returned to the bathroom for more unfocused grooming rituals. I hate to tell you, I never got around to writing the sermon or even opening my laptop. Finally, staring into the mirror, I resolved that the past 5 hours had not been wasted. In fact, they had been vital. My mind required spaciousness. It needed freedom to wander and to be at rest. Like many of you, since the beginning of March, my thoughts have been racing with concern for you. Ideas for how to invigorate and pivot our ministries to meet the need, how to energize and organize our staff, how to homeschool my kids, how to support my parents and siblings, and so on and on. I needed more than an hour to myself for free thought, nothing else. I needed 5 hours, and even that felt too decadent, too luxurious, and simultaneously too scarce. There is something that is happening to the collective consciousness right now that demands we take our Sabbath rest. Of course, there are the justice reasons that our body and soul do not belong to our employers and to the capitalist, and that the capitalist machine must finally set a new pace to human fulfillment rather than sucking all the life energy from all the workers. Then there are the religious reasons, that we are on God's time and not Caesar's time, that we are here for one purpose above all others, and that is to live, to be, not to produce or compete or even serve, but to live the precious life we have been given. There are physical imperatives that in order to support our immune systems, we require rest now more than ever. And in addition to all that, there is a psychological and emotional reason for our great need for rest right now. In 1992, a social psychologist named Ronnie Janoff Bullman published her seminal text, Shattered Assumptions. Her theory of psychology, called the World Assumptions Theory, proposed that experiencing traumatic events can change the way survivors view themselves and the world. Specifically, there are 3 inherent assumptions we generally share. 1, the overall benevolence and predictability of the world. 2, the meaningfulness of the world. And 3, our own self-worth. These fundamental beliefs are the bedrock of the way we organize our lives, and they are the assumptions we are least aware of and least likely to challenge. These 3 fundamental assumptions are confirmed over years of our life experience: that the world is benevolent and predictable, that the world is meaningful, and that I am worthy. These are tacit assumptions. They serve as a basis for our well-being. They guide us in navigating our daily life. Together, these assumptions provide us with a sense of relative invulnerability that enables us to awake each morning and face the day. Now, according to this theory, there are some traumatic events that shatter these worldviews. They severely challenge and break our assumptions about the world and ourselves. Such events could be sudden loss of a loved one, something violent happening to us, becoming critically injured or losing a job, not having any income. These events are particularly traumatic for people who have lived a generally positive life, because those people have such strong optimistic assumptions. The disintegration of these views of the world can be even more traumatic. I encountered this personally when I served on the board of the Rape Crisis Center in Asheville, North Carolina, Our Voice, and worked amongst therapists and crisis counselors who were on the front line of dealing with good people who were suddenly facing extreme trauma. What is most disorienting to these people who have experienced this trauma is the assumption of the world as they previously understood it falling apart. Friends, we are in the middle of a similar trauma now. The difference is our trauma is not individual, it is collective. And our unifying experience can help us chart the path toward resilience, can help us rebuild new world assumptions, and find other ways to trust in the world once again. This is happening to all of us now, in small and large ways. We have not seen the worst days of this pandemic. The losses, even the ones that seem small, are piling up for all of us. We are reorganizing our sense of trust in the world as some of our previous world assumptions shatter. For many of us, our assumptions have been shattering since November of 2016. And for others of us, those assumptions were never fully trusted in the first place. In many ways, getting through life with your world assumptions intact is quite a privileged position. But there is a reason I believe the NAP ministry opened in 2016 as a place for especially Black people, but also all people, to come together and rest. The Sabbath is calling you now, and its urgency is increasing. what we are going through together, this constant readjustment, the cascade of losses, the new things to learn, the cabin fever, it all takes a toll on our energy and our stamina in ways we cannot fully know. Sometimes the urge to nap or do nothing takes us by surprise, and we realize we haven't felt free from worry or free from multitasking in a very, very long time. They say you should never wait until you are thirsty before you drink. By then, it is too late and you are dehydrated. Do not wait until you are exhausted to take your Sabbath, to answer the Sabbath's call. End the Zoom meeting. Turn off your email alerts. Heat up the frozen pizza. Let the dishes be for a while. Reach out and take your Sabbath before you are overtaken. This is a holy time where many Christians contemplate suffering, where Jews are contemplating the plagues. And as Unitarian Universalists, this is a time when we honor the preciousness and the diversity of life and all the ways that we are more interconnected than ever in our grief, in our anxiety, and in our resilience. This pandemic will change us, will change our lives and our priorities in ways that are still unfolding. In those moments, when you feel overwhelmed by anger, frustration, worry, or exhaustion, take your Sabbath, rest, and recover your spirit. Now, I know in some ways I may be preaching against myself from last week where I said, practice creative empathy, be creative, and the truth is this time will require both. It will require us to learn ways of loving, to be more creative in our expression of empathy, and it will require us to take our Sabbath rest. Our mantra on Sundays is to love others, to love ourselves, to love others, and that will heal the world. But it is not possible until we love ourselves first. Whether you are a healthcare worker on the front lines of this crisis, or you are a stay-at-home parent, take your Sabbath, a little each day and a full day each week. This is how we thrive. Let the poet Wendell Berry's words lead you into this week. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Amen. May it be so.